the USA Emergency Broadcast Network, your source for reliable disaster preparedness information.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily the views of this station, its management, sponsors, or other hosts. If you have any comments or suggestions about this program, please contact us at radio@usaebn.org. That's radio@usaebn.org.
Welcome to the Zeta Report here on USA Emergency Broadcasting Network. We are live first Mondays of every month. And my name is Andre. I'm with USA EBN, and I'm joined by Nancy Leader from ZetaTalk.com. Nancy, are you there?
Oh, we have such a good hour prepared. I called it Tacit Admissions because where we're not getting an official admission that Nibiru is real and right out there coming at us, we are getting it unofficially from Russia, China, the U.S., etc. I also want to give you all an update on New Madrid, which is not quiet these days. Before we get into that, let me just give our standard disclaimer. In partnership with USA EBN, Zeta Talk and the Zeta Report will be discussing the challenges of living on a planet beset with change, rising seas, increasing earthquakes and volcanic activity, weather gone wild, and what the worry to do in a worst-case scenario. We will also inject Zeta Talk prophecy on what is coming next and advice on readiness plans and safe locations. Whenever Zeta Talk is quoted, please remember that prophecy is not fact. It is opinion. It only becomes fact when it happens. The Zetas are remarkably accurate, but have been wrong on occasion, so bear that in mind. For more information on this subject, please visit ZetaTalk.com or the Zeta Report on YouTube. It is unlikely that a formal admission that Nibiru exists will occur, given the strength of the cover-up and given the fear that most heads of state have that riots will disrupt their economy and threaten their ability to govern. President Trump's March 26 executive order on guarding the U.S. infrastructure against EMP was a tacit admission. Quoting whitehouse.gov, Executive Order on Coordinating National Resilience to Electromagnetic Pulses, March 26, 2019. The federal government must foster sustainable, efficient, and cost-effective approaches to improving the nation's resilience to the effects of EMPs. A geomagnetic disturbance is a type of natural EMP driven by a temporary disturbance in Earth's magnetic field resulting from interactions with solar eruptions. The Secretary of Defense shall provide timely operational observations, analyses, forecasts, and other products for naturally occurring EMPs. End of the quote. As a result, DARPA sought electronic tests in underground facilities, such as parking lots or subterranean tunnels insulated by the air pockets in concrete. DARPA put out an urgent request on August 28, 2019. Quoting Time magazine, DARPA underground tunnels, August 29, 2019. When DARPA, an agency within the Defense Department that works on advanced technology for the military, asked Twitter users if they knew of any urban underground tunnels, quote, able to host research and experimentation, end quote. Some people were a little freaked out, especially because the request was, quote, short notice, end of the quote from Time. Likely such man-made concrete bunkers protect against electronic screech. The increased electron flow coming through rock as a result of having the rock pressed by plate movement until the air pockets are squeezed out. Thus, the static on radios as a precursor warning before earthquakes. Thus, the tendency of pets to flee at such times. It's a standard earthquake warning. Your pets are running away from home. Another astonishing admission that cataclysmic changes are coming and coming soon to the U.S. was revealed in a recent study requested by the War College by the Army Chief of Staff. Does this sound like the aftertime predicted by the Zetas? Quoting RT, climate apocalypse coming, says U.S. Army, eyeing opportunities for more intervention. This article dated October 25th, 2019. A new U.S. Army report envisioned a bleak near future as a consequence of climate change, with power and water shortages, refugee flows, conflicts driven by hundreds of millions of people displaced by rising sea levels, collapse of the U.S. power grid and transportation, and the inability of the Army itself to provide water for its troops. One of the more apocalyptic short-term scenarios featured in the report is the collapse of the U.S. power grid, leaving the country without refrigeration, water treatment, lights, heating, air conditioning, communications, public transportation, fuel distribution, or pretty much anything a technological civilization requires. End of the quote. Come on now. That's the after time, after the pole shift. Another tacit admission are the plans to evacuate D.C. suddenly. The White House in Washington, D.C. was built on land known as Old Foggy Bottom due to mosquito-ridden soggy lowlands. Of course, during any sloshing of the Atlantic during the last weeks or pole shift, it would be inundated and, due to the predicted sea level rise, permanently inundated. In the opinion of the Zetas, D.C. would also get a blowback tsunami from any major New Madrid quake. The Zetas have predicted a major tsunami headed toward Europe due to the Gulf Stream carrying the water in that direction. But some of this is likely to head toward the East Coast. Thus, the emergency evacuation exercises last July. Important people and important files out of D.C. by helicopter and on short notice. As a tacit admission that Zeta Talk is accurate in their description of the new geography that will emerge after the crustal shift caused by Nibiru, and as yet another tacit admission that Nibiru itself exists, are the target survival locations both Russia and China have established for their populace. Russia's Patriarch Kirill is not tacit. He is direct regarding the end-time revelations and Nibiru. Quoting RT, Orthodox Patriarch warns of approaching end times. This article dated November 20th, 2017. In a public speech in the main Moscow cathedral, Patriarch Kirill said the signs from the Book of Revelation are now apparent. He also called on politicians and ordinary citizens to unite and stop the movement toward the abyss. Quoting Patriarch, all people who love the motherland must be together because we are entering a critical period in the course of human civilization. This can already be seen with the naked eye. You have to be blind not to notice the approaching awe-inspiring moments in history that the apostle and evangelist John was talking about in the Book of Revelation. End of the quote. He comes right out and says it. Here it comes. And what is he talking about? Have to be blind. Just look up in the sky. Putin has been aggressively developing Russia's Far East. In 2014, Russia moved their state offices from Moscow to the Far East and set up a new naval station in the new Siberian Islands just north of the Far East. Quoting NTV, Medvedev instructed to send the offices of large state-owned companies in the Far East. This dated February 5th, 2014. Today, the Prime Minister instructed to transfer to the Far East a number of large state-owned companies and the federal bodies of executive power. End of the quote. Putin has been giving away free land to citizens who move to the Far East. Russian refugees from the Ukraine were relocated there in 2015, but much of the Far East is bitter cold, with Yakutsk considered the coldest city in the world. Thus, there is reluctance. Quoting RT, Putin offers free land for citizens and foreigners in Russia's Far East. This dated May 5th, 2016. President Putin has ordered free land and handouts in Russia's Far East to be provided with minimal infrastructure. He signed a law offering land plots of 1 hectare, which is 2.5 acres, to Russians and naturalized citizens for free. End of the quote. In the opinion of the Zetas, the Far East will not only be above the waves, it will be an almost tropical climate as India will become the new South Pole. Thus, the irony of Putin inviting Modi to participate in the development of the Far East in this climate will switch. India will become cold and the Far East tropical. Quoting Zeta Talk, Modi is eager to accept Putin's offer because he knows that large number of India's people will be welcomed in the Far East. This is beyond a mutually beneficial partnership for Modi and Putin. It is literally life-saving for many now living in India. By providing funds for development in the Far East, Modi is giving them a push. End of the quote from Zeta. China is also making a tacit admission in the ghost cities they have inland, away from their coastlines and the freezing temperatures expected in India. These ghost cities remain empty except for a maintenance staff. China has no comment. Quoting the Daily Mail, The Ghost Towns of China, December 18, 2010. These amazing satellite images show sprawling cities built in remote parts of China that have been left completely abandoned, sometimes years after their construction. Elaborate public buildings and open spaces are completely unused, with the exception of a few government vehicles near communist authority offices. Some estimates put the number of empty homes at as many as 64 million, with up to 20 new cities being built every year in the country's vast swaths of free land. End of the quote. Well, moves the folks away from the coastline and away from India, which will be very cold, and up into the ghost cities, and they're going to be just fine. The placement of these ghost cities is very strategic in the opinion of the Zetas. Quoting Zeta Talk, note that these ghost cities are inland, not coastal, and high enough that they would be land even after the 675-foot sea level rise we have predicted after the pole shift. India is expected to be the new South Pole, and thus provinces in China near India will freeze and struggle, as northern China and Siberia do today. Thus, the ghost cities are to the north of China, in lands that will be temperate. Do the governments of the world take Zeta Talk seriously? China certainly has for the past decade. China is preparing to relocate its citizens to its new ghost cities from the coast and from the southern and western provinces near India. End of the quote. If Russia and China are preparing to move their populace away from the coast and out of land due to be flooded or frozen, the U.S. has such plans. That's Denver, where almost all of the federal agencies are now headquartered. With little fanfare, the headquarters are moved, even if the staff threatens to quit. Many federal agencies are dispersed into regional operations, but there is a distinct rush to move the central headquarters out of D.C. This is presented as a cost-saving venture, or in the case of the CIA, which moved in 2005, to encourage innovation. This just does not make sense, but a flooded D.C. does explain the push. Quoting BizNow in July 16, 2019, the federal government is continuing an effort to relocate agencies away from the Washington region. In a move that could hurt the D.C. office market, Interior Department officials told Bureau of Land Management employees that 81% of the agency's headquarters staff, more than 300 jobs, would move from the D.C. to Grand Junction, Colorado, by the end of the year. The Bureau of Land Management is not the first D.C.-based federal agency to be tapped for a relocation away from the region this year. The U.S. Department of Agriculture last month announced its plans to relocate over 500 jobs from two agencies, the Economic Research Service and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, from D.C. to the Kansas City region. End of the quote from BizNow, and quoting the Denver Post. On May 5, 2005, CIA has plans to relocate the headquarters of its domestic division, which is responsible for operations and recruitment in the United States, from the CIA's Langley, Virginia headquarters to Denver. End of the quote. What is the current liquidity crunch all about? Is this another tacit admission? The U.S. Fed is releasing more cash to banks so they can continue to operate. Are banks not already loaning out funds and getting a return plus interest from these loans? Banks are allowed to loan out times 5 the money they get from the Fed, so are never theoretically strapped for cash. Is the public no longer borrowing? Is the public defaulting on loans? Are the fat cat bankers' salaries being squeezed? The distress in Western banks in Europe and the U.S. is also evident in the subprime rates for bonds and savings being charged in their European Union. Put money into your savings account and you get back less than you put in, minus the subprime rate the banks take from you. Quoting Business Times, world record in negative rates has bankers testing no man's land. This is a recent article, October 31st. After more than 7 years of negative rates, some of Denmark's largest banks are resorting to uncharted territory in order to cope with the extreme monetary regime. Life below zero makes it increasingly difficult to run a bank. It's already led to dramatic adjustments in the banking world, with more lenders relying on other revenue streams besides traditional lending to stay profitable. End of the quote. Lest we think such maneuvers are only in the Western banks, China has run up their central bank debt too, printing money to stay afloat. Per the Zetas, these are all indicators of banks failing, a hallmark prediction of theirs from the start of the Zeta Talk saga. Quoting Zero Hedge, since 2009, China has created $21 trillion in new money, more than double the U.S. Over the past decade, Chinese banks have been on a credit and money creation binge and have created $21 trillion of new money since 2009, more than twice the amount of money created in the U.S., thus Eurozone and Japan combined over the same period. Well, I didn't know that, but you learn something every day reading the news. Western banks have encouraged debt both from individuals in car, credit card, mortgage, and school loan debt, or for third world countries desperate for infrastructure development. Where this was profitable for banks in the past, due to disastrous weather, crop shortages, and insurance company bankruptcies have increased. This is being kept from the public to maintain the cover-up over Nibiru. The message is, never mind, go back to shopping. Quoting Zeta Talk, how do banks fall, softly or with a hard crash? Politicians and the wealthy would prefer the system survive the coming passage of Nibiru, and thus will do all they can to disguise the distress that banks are experiencing. They hope for the common man to learn of Nibiru late, preferably during the last week, so they have no time to stop paying their mortgages, else foreclosures would increase. This is anticipated to be a temporary burden on the banks. End of the quote. Oh boy, do they have their head in the sky. Another tacit admission is bringing the troops home. This was a Trump campaign promise, and he is making good on it. From the announcement at the end of 2018 that troops from Afghanistan were being withdrawn, to the announcement in 2019 that troops in Syria are likewise being withdrawn, they are coming home. Quoting Al Jazeera, December 2018, U.S. President Donald Trump is planning to pull thousands of U.S. troops out of Afghanistan. a day after the Republican president rebuffed top advisors and announced the withdrawal of all U.S. soldiers from Syria. End of the quote. This was a 2003 prediction by the Zetas, who stated that as the Earth changes picked up and threatened the homeland, this would be the result. No longer just the opinion of the Zetas, this is now happening. In other words, the Zetas right again, as they like to say. Quoting Zeta Talk in 2003, in the event of quake-torn roads and crumbling cities, mass populations homeless and roaming the countryside, how should treaties installing the U.S. militaries and bases around the world be viewed? In the event of such earth changes, troops would be brought home under stealth and with little fanfare to their respective homelands, leaving at most a skeleton crew at the bases. And what could be more correct? The Inuit in the Arctic made a tacit admission in 2010 in a Canadian documentary. The study was titled Inuit Knowledge and Climate Change. The Inuit reported they were seeing too much of the sun, thus the ice was softening and melting. The Inuit said, and I quote, "The sun seems higher now than years gone by. The heat of the sun seems hotter, sooner. The tilting of the earth changes everything. If our world has shifted or has tilted north, that's what I wonder about." End of the quote. This is all documented on the Zeta Talk website and elsewhere. An FAA webcam supporting the Inuit in 2016, when visual proof of the sun in the Arctic at midnight arrived via a webcam from Selawik, Alaska, which is north of Fairbanks. This is an FAA webcam, a weather cam for pilots in the area. The Selawik cam is looking north at azimuth 344, which is almost dead north at 360 degrees. Thus it is looking over the North Pole in the direction of Europe, where the sun is high overhead when it is midnight in Alaska. The sun is not supposed to be seen in Alaska at midnight. As per SkyMap, it is below the horizon, not visible. The sun is not supposed to be seen all winter in Alaska, the long night known in the freezing north. Yet the sun rises and stays above the horizon for about 2 hours, then drops below the horizon until the proper time for dawn in Alaska. That's the wobble. Is there no outright admission? Perhaps in Brazil on May 25, 2017, when a senator stood up in their plenary to announce that Nibiru was a real and present danger. He was, of course, ridiculed and told his comments were irrelevant, but to my knowledge, this is the first time Nibiru has been raised openly by a government official as a threat to mankind. Quoting the Brazilian paper Folhaven, Senator Moto drew the attention of parliamentarians during the session on May 25th, announcing in a speech in the Senate plenary the collision of an X7 planet known as Nibiru with Earth. I have received the information from an elect who said NASA states that the planet Nibiru is coming towards Earth and the current cycle will be over soon, said the senator. According to Mota, the NASA report says that the planet changes the gravitational field of the Earth, and with that, 2/3 of humanity will perish. 2/3 will die of hunger and disease. I passed this to my advisors to do a study to see if this planet Nibiru is really approaching Earth, he announced. End of the quote. So that's the end of my talk about tacit admission, and I have quite a bit of information on what happened with the New Madrid just this past month. How are we doing, Andre?
Yep. Yeah, there's been a lot of activity down there. I will say that we've got about 10 minutes left in the feed, so it's time to cover that for sure.
Quickie, here we go. Last month on USAEB, we covered the start of the New Madrid adjustment with the unzipping of the fault line at New Orleans during the collapse of the Hard Rock Hotel on October 12th, and the explosion of the Dow petrochemical plant at Baton Rouge on November 3rd. That the Missouri River was heaving during quake swarms near New Madrid was likewise discussed. What has happened since then? Quakes have continued up and down the Mississippi River between St. Louis, where the Mississippi River bounds the Ozark to the north, and joins the Mississippi River at Ozark, Mississippi, where the Arkansas River bounds the Ozarks on the south. Why? So they are both heaving. Why is Oxford significant? Because upriver is Wichita on November 11th. The residents heard loud booms from snapping rock. As the Zeta say, why did the Ozark Mountains develop in the first place? Before the New Madrid fault line rips, the pressure to rip the New Madrid fault line causes hard rock to buckle and heave. Does methane get released during this heaving and buckling? Kansas City is the center of the Ozarks. May not have been methane release from shattered rock, but their noses believe that was the case. On November 6th, the public was told it was winds sweeping down over cows in Iowa, but only Kansas City got the smell. Then the St. Lawrence Seaway got involved. The Zetas have described the ripping pressure on the North American continent as a bow stress. Because the plates cannot roll, it must rip in a diagonal manner in the center of the plate. Thus, the seaway pulls open, and the ripping of the seaway ends in the Black Seas of South Dakota. Well, on November 11th, the same day as the Wichita booms and the smell, the stress was evident as the Black Hills seismograph went black. It was the only one in the world to go black. In the opinion of the Zetas, all the pieces are in place for the big adjustment. Quoting Zeta Talk, indeed, tearing of the St. Lawrence Seaway will occur during the New Madrid adjustment. We have warned that quakes on the west coast or the Seaway or in the New Madrid region will occur before the major quake of the New Madrid adjustment. Mexico will lurch to the west as this quake occurs, with a settling of land in the west of the Mississippi almost instantly afterward. The Mississippi will seem to have widened, and those who to the west who see a new view as they look east, as their land will have shifted to the southwest as well as dropped. This is classic Zeta Talk, not new. They've made these statements all along. By November 16th, a syncopation could be seen, the seaway spreading stress on the Black Hills where the rip of the seaway ends. Then Oxford, Mississippi goes wobbly at the point where the Arkansas River touches the Mississippi and goes under the Ozarks, which are heaving. Then a magnitude 2.4 at New Madrid, which is actually a 4.2 if one adds 2 plus to the magnitude. As the Zeta, in the opinion of the Zetas, the USGS is downplaying by at least 2 magnitude points. For the Zetas, all is now in place for the big New Madrid adjustment. What will set it off? Per the Zetas, the large quakes at the tip of Mexico, quickly followed by the unzipping. Well, so what is large enough? Mexico has been peppered with quakes. At first, the South American roll happens. Then the Mexico tip starts getting quakes because the Caribbean plate is pushing to the west. That's pushing the tip of Mexico. Well, the most recent thing is that if you take a look, and I did just yesterday, at where the quakes are up there at the Aleutian Islands and down at the tip of Mexico, those 2 spots are going nuts. Those are the tips of the bow. Anyone who's drawn a bow and let it go knows what you do is you push on the center of the bow and you pull the tips closer to each other. That's what's happening. The tips are coming closer. The bow in the center is really under terrible stress, and it's going to go. Then we had Port Neches on, it was just a week ago, big petrochemical plant on the border of Texas and Louisiana in the soft rock near New Madrid and Baton Rouge, etc., just blew up. They can't even try to guess why, because it went on booming all day. Everybody within a 4-mile radius had to evacuate. So, once again, all these explosions. And should we worry about all those refineries down there in the soft rock that will be affected by the New Madrid adjustment, i.e., and the pipelines that go across under the bridges from the refineries to the East Coast, all that oil and gas spilling and erupting and blowing up. Then on November 25th to 27th, we had another syncopation. Albania had a swarm of large quakes. I mean, this was no small stuff because the Africa roll was in process. The South America leans over, Africa rolls. All of this is pulling up, and so all of this nudges the North America plate to finish up with what it wants to do, which is rip in a diagonal manner. And for those new to Zeta Talk, what this means is the New Madrid goes up to Chicago under the Seaway, up along the East Coast, ringing bells in Boston, and then releases the San Andreas to do its thing. So now we have really significant quakes running up the San Andreas. Whoa, all those little volcanoes up there in Washington and Oregon. Biddy-bid-oop. It's going to be a mess for the U.S., and I've done my piece, Andre.
A lot of activity up and down the Mississippi as of late, especially around where, you can just look at the river from, a satellite view if you'd like, or just a map, and see how the Mississippi River gets all convoluted and twisted up like a snake. And it's happened before, so it's going to, you gotta look at the rock structure and everything else to know that it's coming. New Madrid.
And the reason I make such a big deal out of this is because it's not just that the U.S. is going to be devastated, but also that it causes a tsunami going toward Europe, and that's going to wash into London, Paris, all the way. Europe is just going to be whammo, So and then we get a rebound back toward Washington, D.C. How will we not? The Atlantic is going to be pulled apart more. The water will pour into that void, bounce up, and because of the Gulf Stream, be pushed toward Europe. But there'll also be a rebound back toward Washington, D.C. and the East Coast cities. So now we have, what don't we have? I guess up here in Wisconsin, you and I will be okay, Andre, huh?
According to Zeta Talk, I'm kind of banking on that. Well, I know that what's been happening in the news is kind of hard to follow, so I know Q is always a good resource. I don't know if we mentioned Q here before, but there was some issues with website and server functionality for a couple of months, almost 3 months, and back online. So if you are a follower, check it out. I enjoy it. I like following that sort of stuff, especially when it puts hints into the public psyche of what's actually happening. So I think December this year is going to be an interesting month for sure, Earth changes wise and disclosure wise as well, and then the whole
yes,
trying to figure out who's crooked in the government.
Yeah,
I thought
I'm
it was
a big fan of Q. People say, well, how do you know it's real? Well, here's my clincher. When McCain died, his obit had the day, the hour, and the minute, right, posted. Go back exactly 30 days to the day, the hour, and the minute, and Q posted something saying every dog has its day. Well, of course, McCain died on Dog Day. That was the day, But for him to get the hour, the day, and the minute, to me, of course, it was an execution. And because McCain didn't show up with any hair. 3 months earlier, in March, he was supposedly dying of cancer and getting chemo like crazy. Well, he had all his hair. And then he had a house arrest boot at one time, the same time as Hillary, and he wore it on the right foot, except one time he had it on the left foot, or was it the other way around? And his explanation for switching feet was, well, the one I had it on was tired, so I thought I would give it a rest. If you have a ripped ankle or a sprained ankle, you don't decide to give it a rest by putting your support splint on the other foot. It was
right.
An open admission that he was under house arrest. So if anyone hasn't seen Melania's new video on welcoming the Christmas decorations, walking through, not only is it a feast for the eyes, it is so loaded with symbolism. And one of the first things is, as she approaches a tree, and she's got a couple of letters from Scrabble that says "be best." Well, and if you add the letters across this way and that way, the numbers on the letters, it's 45, meaning President 45, be best, I'm with him, that kind of thing. But there, right next, is a domino that has 17 dots on it. Well, they don't come that way. That was a special made domino. 17 is Q, 17th letter of the alphabet. And there's many other things that people have pointed out, where you can see a Q. There's something very strange, and I'm just going to post some New Zeta talk today about all the symbolism, is what does it mean when she's got a model of the White House and she's putting little wreaths in the windows. And the first image you see is two windows don't have a wreath in, and she puts one wreath in one window. Then later you see that all the windows have wreaths in. Now, what does that mean? That there were two open windows, she just put a wreath in, and now they're all in. So speculation abounds, because there's been a lot of, and Zeta Talk has confirmed that Obama is no longer with us either. He had a double that showed up a couple years ago, walking around in front of the White House getting a hot dog, and it was clearly not Obama. Looked like him, except I found the tell. Under the lower lip, the real Obama has a fleshy part, and this double did not have that. Everything else identical. Very good job, right? Well, now, all of a sudden, we've got somebody, supposedly Obama, walking around in Manhattan, and at one point he turns, doesn't think the camera is clicking away, and sticks his tongue out as though his mouth kind of hurts, or lips hurt, and you can see under that fleshy part under the lower lip, every 16th of an inch, there's a poke, 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 poke. Well, what is that thing that they do to make women get big butts? They put fat in there, the fat cells or something like that. It's a butt enhancement. Well, so you can do that with body, and so it looked like he had an injection there. Well, 3 days later, at the Cummings funeral, he looked comfortable with that lower lip. But I'm glad I caught that photo, because the Zetas did confirm that he is no longer with us. Doubles. The Queen is a double now. Check it out on my website. Take a look at those photos. This is confirmed by what is the UK equivalent of Q, who is the dark judge. Very accurate also. So a lot of stuff going on, but we are not necessarily going to hear about it. But have we ever heard, really, who killed JFK? What was really behind 9/11? Was it 19 Arabs with box cutters? Etc., etc. We don't know, and we never will know. And we just have to trust our gut, I guess. Trust our instincts.
Yep, trust your gut. Use your own discernment. Do your own research, and if you get a chance, shut off mainstream media, because they're getting paid or pushed by something else, so they're not in your best interest.
Yeah,
and you can always check out.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to say, how can you believe the polls? Trump has 20, 30,000 people coming every time he appears anywhere, which is practically daily. And then it's like, with the Democrats, you'd be lucky to get a dozen people. I mean, it's just, so it's pretty easy to rig a poll. What you do is you get a group of people that are die-hard Democrats, that darn well are going to vote for Joe Biden no matter what, right? Everybody else has to stay away. Ask that room full of Democrats who they'll vote. Well, Biden runs away with it, national averages. You can rig it by who you ask and what question you pose. That's what we're being fed. So we may not have the 2020 elections. Think about it, Andre. If we have a big New Madrid disaster, and I mean up along the Mississippi, all these bridges getting torn, the gas and oil distribution not going to the East Coast and having to shift over. So now we have cities, because the New Madrid fault line runs up to Chicago and then turns and goes under the seaway of Cleveland, Ohio, all those. A lot of cities are going to have terrible damage. So now we have refugees wandering around, and then the West Coast gets involved, and we have so many homeless, and we have to call martial law because of the riots, and people want to just herd people to refugee camps and keep order, because in chaos there is opportunity for the nasties to try to get away with whatever. People don't have their ID, or they have their ID but they can't get to their voting station. Who knows what the voter rolls are anymore? All of that went up in flames or is under rubble. So, you can just hear it. We need to defer the 2020 elections until people can get established. We can have new voter rolls. They get their ID established, blah, 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 right? And it never happens because then we start rolling into the pole shift time. So, the Zetas will not say yes or no, we're going to have 2020 elections. They just say maybe, because they're not allowed to give us firm dates. They're under rules, because this is our schoolhouse. We have to deal with uncertainty and opportunities to help each other and yada, 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 lecture about transformation and soul growth. So bottom line is they cannot tell us if a tornado's coming or when an earthquake's going to hit. We have to rise to the occasion and help others and thus grow our soul to be wise and massive, like the Grinch who stole Christmas, whose heart grew 4 times that day.
Right. Service to other.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Well, thanks, Nancy. Good show today.
Yeah.
That's really all the time we have. I wanted to thank you and wish you a happy holiday and a happy new year.
You too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You can always, folks out there, same to you as well. Stay prepared. And like we said, the information's out there. You just have to dig for it, whether it's the internet or going to the local library and looking stuff up, because it's out there. It's cloudy. You have to dig for it and discern it. Yeah. Use your gut. Use your gut.
Yes, exactly. I hope to get into crop failures and starvation, global starvation, next month, which I think is a big issue too. We have lectured until we're blue in the face here how to feed yourself, the many ways to do it, how to prepare, get into self-sufficiency. It's time to repeat that lecture and update it with true facts on what the world is dealing with. It's not just going to be prices going up, it's going to be empty shelves. It's going to be, sorry, you have to starve, So don't chew on your shoe leather. Get prepared. Learn how to grow gardens, in containers and bug farms, and we'll get you updated again. We'll bring it all back up, and this time hopefully you will listen. Happy Christmas, folks. It's your last
Thanks, Nancy.
meal. Bye-bye, Andre. Bye-bye.